throbbing heart of Tokyo, I found myself tucked away in the shadowy corners of the busy Shibuya district. It was a typically vibrant Friday evening, with twinkling neon signs dancing off the slick pavement, alive with the chatter of patrons spilling out from the izakayas and the thrum of pulsating music escaping the karaoke parlors. My name is Kenji, a 30-something expat trying to find my footing in the city that never sleeps. The faint scent of soba noodles and the tantalizing aroma of yakitori wafted through the air as I wove my way through the crowd. I glanced at the stream of messages on my phone from Hiro, a friend from work who was sharing another collection of urban legends, his favorite pastime. Hiro was obsessed with the supernatural. The more eerie, the better. Among the tales of haunted high-rises and spectral samurais, one name stood out, a story that sent shivers crawling up my arms: Kuchisake-Onna, the Slit-Mouthed Woman. Laughing it off, I made my way to the subway. As the train doors slid shut, I found myself in the company of a few late-night commuters and an eerily silent woman in the far corner. Her face was obscured by a surgical mask, not uncommon in the wake of the recent health scare. But there was something unsettling about her. Her jet-black hair hung lifelessly, partially obscuring her face, but her eyes were fixated on me, penetrating and ice-cold. "Kenji, focus," I muttered under my breath. "She's just another passenger." Attempting to shake off my unease, I unfolded the newspaper in my hands, a brittle shield against the woman's unwavering gaze. As the train trundled along, my eyes caught a story about a series of mysterious incidents happening around Shibuya. They were referring to them as the masked disappearances. My heart pounded against my ribs as if attempting a daring escape. I cast a surreptitious glance towards the woman. She was gone. Stifling a gasp, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. She must have gotten off at the last station, I rationalized. Yet my gut told me there was something far more sinister at play. Feeling strangely exposed, I got off at the next stop. The usually bustling Shibuya crossing was now ominously deserted, the giant video screens throwing an eerie glow over the empty streets. Each echo of my footsteps on the cobblestone streets seemed to be amplified, a solitary rhythm in the quiet of the night. Just as I was nearing my apartment building, a soft whisper breezed past my ears. "Am I pretty?" The voice was delicate, as frail as the rustling of autumn leaves, but its undercurrent held an echo of menace. It was the masked woman. She stood under a flickering street lamp, her eyes staring intently at me. She wore a dark cloak that blended with the night, and her surgical mask seemed to hold an otherworldly gleam under the pale light. Her question hung heavily in the freezing air, the chirping of the distant cicadas providing a spectral soundtrack. I felt an icy dread spreading through me. Hiro's stories were just tales, weren't they? Surely the Kuchisake-Onna was a myth. Yet here I was, caught in her chilling tableau. My footsteps quickened, but her voice, inescapable as the chill of the night, seemed to trail me. "Am I pretty even now?" Her voice, a mere whisper earlier, now had a slicing edge, as sharp as a samurai's katana. I dared not turn back, the echo of Hiro's tales in my mind urging me forward. By the time I stumbled into my apartment, my heart pounded like a taiko drum, my breath rasped in my ears, and I struggled to shake off the image of the masked woman. I forced myself to rationalize the encounter. After all, Tokyo was a city of millions. Eccentric characters were part of the package. I tried to drift into sleep, but it was elusive, chased away by the echo of the masked woman's voice. I awoke to the early morning rays of the sun spilling through my window. I breathed a sigh of relief. The normalcy of dawn felt comforting after the previous night's ordeal. Yet the image of the woman and her strange questions gnawed at me. I decided to confide in Hiro at our office. Hiro's obsession with the paranormal might have made him a punchline at the office, but his vast knowledge of local lore seemed like my best bet. As I narrated my encounter, Hiro's usual jovial face turned ashen. He didn't need to say it. I knew he was thinking of the Kuchisake-Onna. "You shouldn't have answered her, Kenji." His voice held a note of genuine worry. He began narrating the legend in hushed tones, reminding me of the woman's modus operandi, her innocent question, her hideous revelation, and the inevitable fate of her victims. My skepticism wavered under the weight of my eerie encounter. Hiro, it's just a legend, isn't it? I tried to reassure myself more than anything, but Hiro's grim expression did little to quell my fears. I left the office that evening with a heavy heart, the usually vibrant streets of Tokyo feeling strangely ominous. The news of another masked disappearance didn't help. This time, a young man from the Shibuya district, eerily close to my apartment. The whispers around town grew in intensity. Could the Kuchisake-Onna be more than just a tale? As I neared my apartment, every shadow seemed menacing, every woman in a mask a potential threat. But the night passed uneventfully. I began to believe it was all a product of my overactive imagination. The days rolled on, and the woman's face became nothing more than a faded image in my mind. But the peace was short-lived. A week later, on another lonely subway ride, a familiar voice cut through the murmur of the train. "Am I pretty?" The words slithered through the air, embedding themselves into the marrow of my bones. A chill washed over me, colder than any Tokyo winter. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the train, the masked woman stood at the other end of the carriage, her dark eyes locked onto mine. I was trapped in the icy grip of her gaze. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. Each syllable of her question echoed ominously through the carriage. The other passengers seemed oblivious to the spectral presence among them, their eyes glued to their devices or closed in exhaustion. "Am I pretty?" she asked again, her words a chilling melody that cut through the monotonous drone of the moving train. Her unwavering gaze, darker than the depths of the night outside, bore into me. Caught in the grasp of dread, I mustered up a feeble nod, hoping this would satiate her curiosity. But she was not done. She moved towards me, her movements languid yet predatory. She was a shadow that stretched and skewed, consuming the space around her. She halted in front of me, our reflections flickering in the train's cold metal surface. "Even now?" Her voice, once delicate, now held a sinister undertone. As she pulled away her mask, my heart froze. Her mouth, once hidden, was now a gaping wound sliced from ear to ear. A grotesque grin that sent jolts of terror surging through me. Her icy eyes burned with a strange, deranged delight as she reveled in my horror. Stifling a scream, I lurched from my seat, the train screeching to a halt at the next station as if on cue. I stumbled out onto the platform, the night air doing little to cool my burning face. I dared not look back. The image of her twisted grin seared into my mind. I sprinted through the labyrinthine alleys of Shibuya, my breath ragged, my heart a frenzied drummer. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Yet the terror I felt was as real as the cold, hard pavement beneath my feet. I couldn't help but think of Hiro's warning. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, the door slamming shut behind me, a temporary respite from the horror I had just encountered. My once cozy refuge now seemed like a cage. I drew the blinds tightly, a feeble attempt at fortifying myself from the reality that was closing in. Hunched on my couch, I found my trembling fingers dialing Hiro's number. His voice, usually jovial, held a note of worry as I recounted the horrifying encounter. He fell silent for a moment, the silence as unsettling as the lonely echo in a deserted shrine. "Kenji, you need to leave Tokyo," he finally muttered. His words hung heavily in the air. Leave Tokyo? I was an expat. Tokyo was my home away from home. But Hiro's advice was clear. If the urban legend were true, she wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. Could I escape her? Or was I destined to become another masked disappearance? Only time would tell. As the city of Tokyo slept peacefully, unaware of the sinister presence that lurked in its shadows, my fight for survival had only just begun. For the next few days, my life became a blur of hasty decisions and hurried goodbyes. The news of another masked disappearance only accelerated my plans. Tokyo, once a city of dreams, was now a nightmarish labyrinth. I chose to leave for Osaka, hoping that distance would be my ally. As I packed the remnants of my Tokyo life, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder constantly, half expecting to see the slit-mouthed woman in the corners of my apartment. My mind buzzed with a toxic cocktail of fear and uncertainty. I slept with one eye open, the softest of sounds jolting me awake. The morning of my departure arrived with an overcast sky, as if Tokyo shared my melancholy. I boarded the Shinkansen with a heavy heart. The city I had called home was slowly being swallowed by the countryside's green blur. Just as the sun began to set, casting long, haunting shadows across the cabin, a familiar, spine-tingling voice broke through the murmur of the moving train. "Am I pretty?" A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. I turned to see the slit-mouthed woman standing at the end of the carriage. Her eyes bore into me with an eerie intensity. I was hundreds of miles away from Tokyo, yet she was here. The realization hit me hard. There was no escaping her. Even now, she moved closer, her voice echoing ominously in the carriage. She removed her mask, revealing her horrifying disfigurement. The passengers continued their conversations, oblivious to the spectral presence among them. I was frozen in my seat. She was inches away now. Her icy gaze cut through me, but instead of the fear that usually washed over me, a strange calm settled in. Perhaps it was the acceptance of the inevitable. I looked into her eyes, the eyes of a legend that had stepped out of the shadows of folklore. And then, I remembered something Hero had once said. Sometimes they just want to be heard, acknowledged. Gathering every ounce of courage, I met her horrifying gaze. "Yes, you are pretty," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Even now." She studied me for a moment, her eyes softening ever so slightly. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The carriage was just as it had been. Passengers engrossed in their books, their conversations, their devices, all oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. The train trudged along, leaving behind the setting sun and the city of Tokyo. I leaned back in my seat, my heart still racing from the encounter. But there was an odd sense of relief, a weight lifted. As the city lights of Osaka came into view, I knew my encounter with the Kuchisake-Onna was over. She had left as abruptly as she had appeared, leaving behind a trail of dreadful memories. In the heart of Osaka, far from the shadowy alleys of Shibuya and the spectral woman who haunted them, I found solace. Tokyo was a closed chapter, but the tale of the slit-mouthed woman, my tale, would linger on. Until the next victim.